Okay, good morning. Last time we left off, we were in the middle of the distance vector / Bellman-Ford algorithm. So the theory community refers to it as Bellman-Ford, which is the underlying algorithm. And it's a networking community. The implementation is referred to as distance vector. Okay, same idea. Just different names. Bellman and Ford were the guys who came up with the algorithm. Okay, and what we did to completion was first version we saw was a table of all nodes building a tree to a single destination. Okay, that was the table where I had every node A, B, C, D, E, and then we had time going down on this axis, right? And then you had 5, C, and then the arrows and such and such. This was the first version we looked at, and now the second version is not really a second version. It's the same protocol, just done to greater completion. Is where all nodes are building just path trees to all destinations. And I don't want to confuse people, but sometimes it's easier to think of the tree being built from the destination. So all these nodes, they're interested in reaching a certain point. So for instance, they're interested in reaching node R. And so here we consider R the destination, and other times we consider R the root. It's just you're sort of rotating your perspective of the tree. Whether this is still the root of the tree, it's just the root can be the source of the tree or the destination of the tree. Right? These are all undirected graphs that we've been looking at, so we don't have to really concern ourselves with edge directions. Okay. So here the root is the destination. Doesn't really change anything in comparison to thinking about the root as the source. Okay. Anyway, so to all destinations. So every node has there's a different tree to every different. We're building trees simultaneously at every root, and of course there are also trees. Anyways, if you try and look at the thing, it's going to be from a graphical perspective, you're going to have no longer just a single tree, but several trees simultaneously, so it's going to look like a big graph you're drawing anyway. But the idea is that every node is going to have a table. Okay. So let's call this node A. Node A's table, and it has along the rows every single node in the network listed in its table, presumably including even itself, and along the columns all of its neighbors. Okay, so let me use n sub l. This is for a node in a graph with L nodes total, and let's say a node A, and A has k neighbors. Okay, and each entry in the table is, so for instance, this entry right here is going to be entry in position I, j in this table, is the distance that A must travel to get to n sub I when the first hop is V sub j. Using V sub j's best known, i.e. shortest known path. Okay, so graphically think of it this way. Here's what's happening. Here's our node A. Here's some neighbor Vj. Okay? And here's all the other nodes that work. N1, N2, N3, N4, N5, N6, and 7. Okay, and there's some edge weight, I'll just call it W, between A and Vj. Okay? And Vj sends A a report of the distances that it knows to these various nodes. The current shortest paths that it knows of. Just the distances, not the paths themselves. Okay? So what A knows is that if it goes through Vj, its distance to these nodes is W plus whatever Vj reports. Right? Right? So for instance, if I tell you, bring the package to my house and I can get it to California, I only need to travel 10,000 miles. Okay? And if my house is a mile away from your house, then you know that if you bring me the package, the total distance it's going to travel is 10,001 miles. Right? The mile you got to use to bring it to my house plus the 10,000 I say it takes me to bring it to California. Okay? We all know that obviously California is not really 10,000 miles away, so I'm not taking the optimal route. But that's what's happening here. Right? Everybody sees? Okay, so then what does A do to participate in this protocol? Okay, so A is going to collect information from all its neighbors. Again, here's A, here's V1, V2, Vk. Take a particular destination and sub I, and let's call the distance V1 reports D1, the distance V2 reports D2 up to Dk. Or not the distance reported, but after you add this weight of W. And sub I is storing the distance that it needs in order to reach n sub I if it goes through V1, V2, Vk. Right? Well, one of these is the smallest of the bunch. Or maybe there's a tie, but you break ties arbitrarily. Okay, so take min of D1, Dk, and A tells its neighbors this minimum distance it requires to reach n sub I. Right? So it plays the same game that all the other nodes are playing. I get information from other nodes about how far they need to go to get to certain distances, and then I go ahead and I tell my neighbors about this distance. Okay, and the rule is every time you receive some information from a neighbor that's different than before, you recompute your tables, and you recompute your minimum distances, and if those are different than before, you send it out to your neighbors. Okay, it's the same thing we were doing with this table going down, except we were doing it for just one destination. Now we're doing it simultaneously for all destinations. Okay, so what I do is I take these minimums. Okay, they're going to be in possibly in different columns, or very likely in columns for different destinations. I take this vector and I set out to all my neighbors, right? And whenever I get a vector from a neighbor, I add my weight W to that, and I stick it in that neighbor column. Okay? So just to reiterate what protocol is. When receiving a neighbor's vector, okay, and hence this is why it's called distance vector, of distances. It currently has to all nodes network. Okay, I do the following. One, I add say the weight of edge n to vj, where I'm n and vj is the neighbor. That's the network, sent the vector. Add this amount to each component in the vector. Then 2, repute minimum distances to each node over all neighbors columns. If this minimum distance vector differs from previous, then send it to all neighbors. Okay, so a node sits there idly until it gets a new vector from one of its neighbors. It updates the column appropriately for that neighbor who sent it the vector. Then it recomputes the minimum distances, and if any of them have changed, then it has to notify all its neighbors of these changes. Okay, so you really don't have to send the entire vector each time. You just have to send the nodes whose distances have changed, but the way it's usually implemented, you send the entire vector. Okay, where each component in the vector is a different node. That's the destination of interest. Okay? So let's do a simple example. Any questions before we start the example? Okay, so here's a really simple example. Let's see. 1, 2, 10. Okay. Let's make it a little more complicated, just so. Here we go. So we can draw what everybody's table was. So here's our graph, and here's our initial tables. Okay, A has 2 neighbors, B and C. And let's just list all nodes in the columns. A, B, C, D. Node B has two neighbors, A and C. And A, B, C, D. Okay, node C has three neighbors, A, B, and D. And node D has one neighbor, C. Okay, so initially you see your table with the distance that you're aware of, so the immediate edge, if you have one to that destination. If you don't, you fill it with 0. So, sorry, with infinity. So what do I mean by that? A's distance to B, if it goes through B, is 1. Right? That's what this entry means. Our destination is B. Our first hop is B. Okay. A can see, because it's got an edge connecting it directly, that has distance 1. And similarly, A's distance to C through C is 10. And let's not worry about this row. I mean, A doesn't care about being able to reach A. B doesn't care about being able to reach B. C doesn't care about being able to reach C. D doesn't care about being able to reach D. So that's A's initial vector. Okay, and the other entries it doesn't know about. It doesn't receive any information. It doesn't know how far it's going to take to get to B by going through C. So this is initially infinity, this is initially infinity, and it doesn't have any idea how to reach D initially. So those are set to infinity. Okay, and similarly, B has no idea how to reach D. C can reach D directly. So by going through D. So that's got edge weight 12. Otherwise it's infinite. And D knows how to reach C by going through C. That's distance 12. But it has no idea how to reach B or A. Okay. B's distance to A going through A is 1. This it doesn't know. B's distance to C going through C is 2. Okay, this it doesn't know. C's distance to A going through A is 10. Those it doesn't yet know. Distance to B going through B is, let's see, 2. C's distance to D, C's distance to C. There we go. Okay? So people see how I filled out the table initially? Okay. And when you first start off, you're supposed to send your information to your neighbors as well. So when the node is first initiated, it sends its information to its neighbors, and then after that, the rule is only when the table is updated is it supposed to send a change. So let's say A forwards its information to B. So what does A's shortest path vector look like? A's distance to itself is obviously 0, right? That's why we didn't bother keeping the entry. Shortest distance to B that it's currently aware of is 1. Its shortest distance to C that it's currently aware of is 10. And its shortest distance to D that it's currently aware of is infinite. Right? It sends its information to its neighbors. So it sends it to B and to C. Okay? So now B and C update their tables with this information that they're getting. So after it gets information, B's distance from A is 1. So it's going to take all the information that it gets from A and add 1 to that information. Okay, so it has to add 1 to this vector and put it in the first column. So it becomes 1, 2, 11, infinity. But we're just going to keep this column blank. I mean, B's distance to B it doesn't care about. And this column didn't change. It didn't get any information from C. Okay, and similarly, C has to update its first column as well. Okay, so when C updates its first column, it uses this vector 0, 1, 10, infinity. and it has to add 10 to it. C doesn't care about its distance to itself and infinity. Okay? So if you continue running this process, so for instance now, suppose B is the next node to send out a vector. Well, then it also pick the minimum values here. Either one, either infinity, and forward that vector out to its neighbors. So it would send its vector to A and C. Okay, and the process continues until a node, when it updates its minimum vector, it makes no change to the values. Then that node ceases to forward, unless in a subsequent round it gets a vector that changes its distance information, its minimum distance information. Yeah, Ron. Yeah. I want you to work this through.
Right, and we should treat it like when it first starts, each node just knows about immediate neighbors.
Just knows about immediate neighbors, yeah.
And on each step going down, we should assume that, okay, A sends it out. So at that round, B and C get updated, then in the round following, what happens? B sends out its vectors? Or?
Yeah, it's easy. The easiest way to do it, if you're gonna show this thing. I mean, in practice, they can all do it simultaneously, right? But the easiest thing to do is to, just choose a node who hasn't sent a message yet at all, like send one initially, or choose whose table has changed since the last time it sent a message, whose minimum distance vector has changed since the last time it sent a message. So do it in any order you want.
It's best to probably go in the order of first sending out.
Sorry?
Is it best to go in the order of which nodes have yet to send out their minimum vectors for the first time?
It depends. I mean, it depends a lot on the structure of the graph. I mean, the only thing I can recommend avoiding is suppose B's table changes. Suppose B's and C's table changes, right? Now B and C both have to forward something to their neighbors, right? They may send something to each other. So let one's update propagate to let B's update propagate to C before C sends out its vector, right? Because if you in practice, what's going to happen is they're both going to have updates to send. You can imagine that they both transmit, and these transmissions crisscross, so they both receive all. That's okay. It's still going to work properly, but you may as well, let this guy receive the update, make his changes, and then send it in the other direction and make his changes. You're probably going to do anyway. I mean, it's easier to do it that way. But the order, if you have some insight into the graph, you may be able to reduce the number of steps you're going to take by choosing the order appropriately. But in practice, that doesn't happen, so I'm not going to ask you to do it. I mean, I'm not going to ask you to do that. But do people get how it works? Do you have a question, Ezra?
I got that 11. I see it through the graph, but I don't understand. This 11, why did you add what?
This vector comes from A, right? B is connected to A by an edge of length 1. So it has to add 1 to every component of this vector and store it in the table, in A's column. So it's going to store an 11 for C. Right? I mean, this vector plus 1 gives you 1, 2, 11, infinity. So you should be storing 1, 2, 11, infinity, but we don't really care about B's path going to B. Oh, for this one here. So it says it's so here, you have the distance between C and A is 10. So you have to add 10 to this vector. Right? So you add 10 to the one here. You store that in this column. This vector that A is saying out, this is A's claim distance. A claims that it can reach all these nodes within this distance reported here. Okay? So if A claims this distance and C knows that it takes distance 10 to get to A, then when it goes through A to get to these various distances, it's the value listed here plus 10. So that's what it has to store in its table. And I just don't bother storing C's distance to itself going through A. I mean, because it already knows it can get a distance 0. Yeah.
If the value in the column is smaller than the value in the vector plus the weighted distance between those 2 points, then you don't update it.
You always update. You always have to update. Yeah, and actually we're gonna see why in a minute. You always take this column, add the distance of the edge and stick it in here because that node reported a change in distance, so you have to go by that reported change. Okay, and there's a proof. I'm not going to go through it here that this does converge. Okay, as long as the edge weights in the graph stay fixed. So, do people have questions? Because the procedure is pretty straightforward, and I mean it's easy to get confused by it. But if you just follow the procedure, it's going to work. So, do you understand why now that we add? Got it? Okay. So every step, what every node is doing is, so for instance, when A sends this vector, it's letting B and C know these are the shortest paths I know about all these different destinations. And then they keep track of, well, if I was to go through A, this is how far the packet would have to travel based on what these other nodes, my neighbors currently know about in order to reach all these destinations. And so then it chooses the minimum and tells its neighbors, this is the shortest distance I know. Okay, people get the idea? Okay. Okay, what if edge weights change? Okay, so consider the previous example. At convergence, table looks like what? A's table is going to be got neighbors B and C. So let's think about what this thing is going to look like. So at convergence, every node should be reporting the shortest path distance where it's forced to go through a certain neighbor. Okay. So A's path to B going through B, the shortest path will be 1. And A's shortest path to C going through B is going to be 3. And A's shortest path to D going through B is going to be 15, right? And if C had to be the first hop neighbor, A's shortest path to B is going to be 12. Right? Does everybody see that? I mean, you have to take your first hop through C. And going to C through C is going to be 10. And going to D through C is going to be 22. Oh, yeah. Let me just leave out the node itself. Yes. going to be, okay, for B to get to C by going through A, what's the shortest path? It's going to have distance 4. Okay? B is going to go to A, and A is going to send it back to B, and then it's going to go another 2. Okay, that's how we get 4. And the distance to D, the shortest path going through A is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 16. Everybody see that? I mean, in these paths, it's actually shorter. If B sends it to A, and then A will then take the shortest path going back to B and then going through D. Yeah?
Should the path from D go through C to A be 14, and then 15 instead of 22?
22? D has to go through C,
Yeah.
right?
CBA.
D, C, B, A. Well, this, sorry, I'm not sure. You're talking about,
The A table.
uh-huh.
The D goes through C to A. That's
No, this A going to D through C. Not D going A through C. A has to go, the first hop has to go from A to C.
Yeah, but I thought the source and the root and the destination doesn't matter.
Destination is D. Now, I'm saying we're building shortest path trees, but this is asking if A is going to take a path. The way to read this is this node, the first hop has to be, you have to go from A to C for what's in this table. You can't go from, this table does not say you go from D to C. In this table, you have to go from A to C and then take the shortest path you can to get to D. Okay? For node C, oh, we didn't even finish this table. If we're going through C, if B goes through C, then to get to A, it's distance 5, right? B to C, C to B, B to A. Okay. B to get to C going through C is going to be 2. And through C to get to D is going to be 14. Okay, C table. C going to A through A is 10. Through A to B is 11. Through A to D is going to be 10, 11, 12, 13, 25. Right? I mean, the first hop, C going to D through A. So first has to take that hop going to A, which is distance 10, and the shortest path from A will take it to B to C to D. For B, to get to A going through B is going to be 2, 3. To get to B going through B is going to be 2. And to get to D going through B is 2, 4, 16. And A through C, to get to A through C is going to be 10. Sorry, wait. This neighbor should be D. Right? So it's always going to be 12 and then back to get to everyone except to D. So to get to D is going to be 12. To get to A is going to be 12, 24, and then 2, 3, so 27. To get B is going to be 24 plus 2. Okay? And finally D. Always going through C. Distance 12 to get to C. Distance 14 to get to B. Distance 15 to get to A. And these are short paths. Okay, the ones I've circled are the shortest paths. So A's shortest path distance to C is 3. B's shortest path distance to C is 2, and it should go through C as its first hop in order to get there. C's shortest path distance to A is 3, and it should go through B in order to get there. Okay, so all the information you need to route is in this table. Okay, the question is, what if an edge weight changes? All right. So let's say suddenly this edge turns into weight 50 from 1. Okay, so what happens in this table? I mean, this information is no longer correct, right? A's distance to B is no longer 1. A's distance to C, the minimum path distance, is no longer 3, right? 10 now becomes a shorter distance, right? So this table is no longer correct. But A and B both observe that this edge length has changed. Okay, so suppose neighbors can observe the change. Okay, then A and B have to update their tables. So this entry gets updated in A. This one becomes 50. Okay? And B's entry also has to get updated. This one becomes 50 as well. They have to recompute their minimum distance tables. Okay? A's has changed. It's no longer 1, 3, 15 is no longer the minimum distance vector. It is now 12, 3, 15. Right? So A would then have to broadcast this information to B and C. With this change, B's table has also changed. So it's going to have to broadcast the information as well. Okay? Let's see.
You only add 50 to that entry? You add 50 to each?
You only add, so only A and B are the neighbors. They're bordering on this edge that's changed weight. They're the only ones who notice the change, right? And from their perspective, that's the only entry they're allowed to change. They don't see the entire graph. They only have this local perspective. So all A knows is that B claims its shortest path to C is 3. Right? Sorry, A knows that if it goes through B, the shortest path to get to C is 3. I'm sorry, you're right. Yeah, my bad. You would have to change the entire column. Right? Because it's going through B, and obviously it can no longer get there in just distance 3 because you've added the edge between it and B has increased by 49. So you'd have to change this entire column, and B would have to do the same for A's column. You have to add 49. Okay? And you have to compute the new minimum distance vector and send that to your neighbors. Okay. Here's a sad fact about the distance vector. Well, I guess I should say good news and bad news about the distance vector. Shorter path information. Edges decreasing in length. Propagates quickly. Whereas longer path info edges increasing in length. May propagate very slowly. And let me try and illustrate this problem. Let's see. Here's two nodes X and Y that are neighbors with them. Okay. And suppose they want to reach a destination Z. Okay, and they want to get there according to the shortest path. Okay, and suppose Y reports some shortest path of distance L. Okay, this edge is W. Suppose this turns out to be X's best path. Okay, so Y's shortest path to Z is length L. X's shortest path goes through Y. Distance W plus L. Okay, so the picture looks like this. Now suppose suppose some edge here gets shorter. Okay? Well, if this edge shrinks in length, Y's path only gets even better. Right? If this edge shrinks by delta, Y's shortest path becomes length L minus delta, right? And X's shortest path becomes L plus W minus delta. And everybody's still happy. Okay, it's the shorter path that's not really the interesting case. It's going to be when the edge length gets longer. That's going to be interesting. So let me be a little bit more concrete with this example. So let's see. Let's say the edge between them has length 1. Okay? And let's say Y can somehow claim to be able to reach Z in distance 50. Okay? So what's happening here? Y is claiming to Y tells X can reach Z in distance 50. Right? And in distance vector, the neighbors are always reporting information to one another. So X tells Y can reach Z in distance 51. Right? Well, x's distance is already bigger than y's. So clearly y is going to continue. There's some node here. Let's call it w. Let's call it n. Y is always going to choose the route through n, right? Because that route is shorter than the route through x. I mean, obviously, if x is going through y to get to z, and it's reporting distance 51, obviously y's path to z is going to be shorter than the path by going x and then back y to z, right? So y is not going to choose the path going through x as its minimum path to get to z. But y doesn't necessarily know that x's path of length 51 is going this way. I mean, it could have also been another path, x to z, of length 51. You know, something direct, just so happen to match that path as well, right? X could have had another path of length 51, not going through y, could have taken it to z. So as far as y knows, x has this path of length 51. But it's longer than its path that it currently has from y to z. But now suppose an edge changes length. Suppose suddenly something here grows in length. Okay, suppose now that this path, instead of being length 50, suddenly it turns to length 100. Right? So now y knows that if it goes through n, in order to get to z, it's going to be length 100. Okay? But x is reporting a path of length 51 to get to z. And y knows it's only got a distance of 1 to get to x. So if it goes through x, y has a path of length 52 to get to z. Right? So then y tells x, I should say y tells x, can reach z with path length 52, right? But now x was able to reach z with length 51 when y was reporting a distance of 50, because it's going through y. But x's shortest path is still going through y, right? But now y claims it's a distance 52. So x has to recompute its distance to z if it goes through y. So x tells y, after just recomputation, can reach z with path length 53. Okay, well, y still, its shortest path is going through x, and it's going to have length of 54, so let's report that back to x. So y tells x, it goes on 54, x tells y, 55, and this process keeps going. They have to keep iterating back and forth. They have to keep sending messages to one another. Each time, the path length is increasing by 1. At one point, y is going to tell x, it can reach it in path length 100, okay? That's either going through x or going through its neighbor n. And then x will say it can reach it in path length 101, and y will no longer choose x. I mean, that path has now become longer than this path. So it will stabilize at the correct value. So this process ends when x tells y, y tells x distance 100, and then x tells y distance 101, and now there's no reason to proceed any further. Okay, they have now reached the shortest path. But the problem is that they flip-flop back and forth, because you got two neighbors, each of whom believes that they're going through the other one to get to this destination, and that the other one is offering the shortest path. So they're sort of both pointing at each other and saying, you know, I have distance d to get to this destination, and then the other one, believing that that's its shortest path, adds the weight of the edge and says, okay, now I've got distance d plus this w to get there, and now this one is still pointing through that one, so now adds another w, and now this one still pointing through that one adds another w. So it keeps going up and up and up, and this process is what's called split horizon. Right? The fact that they both believe the shortest path is through the other. Okay? And the problem occurs because each node wants to take the shortest path to get to the destination, and it's unaware of how its neighbor is getting there. All it knows is that, look, I know how far you go to get there. I don't care how you get there. You're closer than me, so I'm going through you. And they don't tell one another that they're going through each other. So that's why this process continues forever. There's a technique called poison reverse that alleviates this problem some of the time, not always. Okay, and it's a small modification of distance vector. And here's the idea. If I'm going through you to get to, suppose I'm a node and you're a node. If I'm going through you to get to a certain destination, let's say destination Z, then why do I want to tell you my distance to Z? The only way me telling you my distance to Z could be useful is for you to then use that information to go through me to get to Z. But if I'm going through you to get to Z, I don't want you going through me to get to Z. So in other words, in this picture here, here's y going in this direction in order to get to z. Let's say it has distance 50. So y under normal distance vector is going to tell x my distance to z is 50. Okay? X decides going through y is its shortest path. Under normal distance vector, x would have to report back to y my distance to z is 51. Right? But we're going to make a change. Again, the only reason why that information would ever x's distance to z is if y might take a path through x in order to get to z. Right? Otherwise, there's no point in having x give y that information. And if x is going to go through y as its shortest path to z, then we definitely don't want y going through x as well. It makes no sense, right? There's no reason why two nodes should take one another as the shortest path. So instead of, if x is going through y to get to z, then x reports to y that its distance to z is infinity. Okay, in other words, I'm going through you to get to z. And if you ask me what's your distance to z, I'll tell you it's infinity. Doesn't matter. You don't need to know it. Right? I'm going through you, so you don't want to go through me. You get to z, and that's the equivalent of what having distance infinity does. You'd never go through a node to get to a destination if it's reporting distance infinity. Okay, so for instance, in these tables, you look at C, for instance. Okay, before the change, C's minimum distance vector is 3, 2, 12. Right? When it sends out this vector, let's say when it's sending it to node B, what it says is that it has distance infinity to node A. Okay, so when C sends out the vector A, B, C, D, okay, the normal vector would be 3, 2, 0, 12. Right, that's what the vector normally looks like. When it sends this vector to A, instead of saying distance, wait, did I do this wrong? Sorry. When C sends this vector to B, it changes so when this vector goes to B, yeah, I did this right. It sends this vector to B. It's going to say that its distance to A, since both of these entries were going through B, it's going to change both of these to infinity. And that's what it sends to node B under poison reverse. Okay, in other words, C is going through B in order to get to node A and in order to get to node B in distances 3 and 2 respectively. So when it sends this information to node B, it does not want to tell B, I can get to node A in distance 3. Because if there's some change in the network, then B may somehow think that this distance 3 is its shortest path in order to get to A. And B does not know that C's current path is going through it. So it may choose to go through C. And you don't want to have that happen. You have the same phenomenon that you have over here. So instead, when C notifies B of its distance to A, it doesn't say 3. It says infinity. People follow that? Who follows that? Okay, let me just try and reiterate for those of you who didn't follow. There it is. A, B, C, E. Right, here's the graph. And currently, C knows if I go through B, reach A in distance 2, and in distance 3, right? And so normally, if you're running normal distance vector, it would send a distance vector to B, telling it, I can get to A in distance 3, right? Now suppose something happens. Suppose B, right, this edge is currently 1. Suppose this edge changes to 50. Right? Under normal distance vector, what's B's choices? You can go directly to A in distance 50, or C is reporting this distance of 3 to get to A. Right? So B will say, hey, I'll take that instead. Right? And so now the edge weight between B and C is 2. So rather than going distance 50, it'll go distance 5. It'll take the distance 2 from B to C, and then it'll take the additional 3 that C is claiming it can use to get to A. The problem is that C was reporting this distance of 3 that it could obtain by going through B. B didn't know that C was getting there by going through B. All B knew was that C could get to A in distance 3. Right? So when this edge suddenly increased in length, since C was reporting distance 3 to A, B could then turn around and say, I'll take this path. And then you'd have this split horizon phenomenon. B would say, I can get there in distance 5. C knows it's going through B, that this path of length 5 plus the edge of length 2 is its best bet. So it'll go to distance 7. That changes B. And again, you have this oscillation until finally B realizes its best path is by going this way. Or actually, in this case, it would stabilize when C finally realized that its best path is no longer through B, but through A of distance 10, and then B would go through C. It'll be distance 12. If you don't use distance vector, if you employ poison reverse, so because C is going through B, instead of telling B I can get to A in distance 3, it doesn't want B thinking about going through it while it's going through B. So it will tell B my distance to A is infinity. Now when this edge changes length, okay, B has a choice of infinity or 50. So it'll take the 50. So B will then choose to go this way. Okay? And it reports this distance of 50 to node C. And now node C has to update its table. It has a choice of either going 52 or going 10. Okay? Well, 10 is better. So C will choose to go this way of distance 10. Now C is no longer going through B in order to get to A. So now it will report to B its distance to A, since it's no longer going through it. So B will report, I can get to A in distance 10. B will compare the 10 plus the 2 to its current 50 and realize it's better to go in the other direction. And B will choose to go this way. And again, you stabilize on the correct shortest path. So this Poisson reverse technique, all it's saying is if I leave my shortest path is through node X, then rather than reporting my shortest distance to that destination, I make my report to X, I'll tell X my distance to that node is infinity. That's the only difference, that Poisson reverse, the only implementation difference, and it prevents this split horizon flip-flopping property, count to infinity problem. Yeah, Emil.
So when the edge changes from 1 to 50, what does B send?
When you use Poisson reverse or when you don't?
What does send 1?
When you use Poisson reverse or when you don't?
Yeah, you do.
When you use no, you're still sending the vector. Okay, of all these distances. This vector was taken from a table. Right, so we're talking about B. So its neighbors are A and C, right? And some of the minimum paths may come out of where your next top neighbor is A, and some of them may be where your next top neighbor is C. If it comes from the, so this is a vector we're sending to C from B. Okay? Any entry for which the next hop is C, you change that to infinity in the vector that you send to C. In the vector that you send to A, any entry where the next hop is A, you send infinity in its place, right? We're using infinity as a substitute for, I'm going through you. The length of the path is of no consequence to you because you should not be taking this path to reach this destination. Yeah, Ezra. When C sends to B, yeah, it's true in any case. When C sends to B, any minimum distance that's obtained by where B is the entry, where B is the next hop, then yeah, you send infinity instead when you're sending to B. And when C is sending to A, any entry where the next hop was A, you set that to infinity. So for instance, let's say the table looks like this. Suppose that's what C's table looks like. Okay, so these are the minimum distance entries, right? So what does the vector look like? It sends two vectors. Here's a vector going to A, and here's a vector going to B. The vector going to A is going to read infinity 1, 1, and the vector going to B is going to read 3, infinity, infinity. Okay? Because C is going through whatever destination this is, N to bi. C is going through B in order to get to N to bi in the minimum known distance. So it doesn't want to tell B that distance. Instead, it wants to tell B that, think of that distance as infinity. Because I don't want you choosing to go through. The only reason you're sending this information to B is so that B can choose nodes to be the next hop on some shortest path. So why even get the information to allow it to sort of come back through me when I'm already using it to go through the shortest path? Okay. If you're not completely comfortable with this, the last two problems on the homework are to make you more comfortable with it. I mean, you'll actually do out the example, and you'll see when you use Poisson reverse, when you don't use Poisson reverse, what the difference is. And hopefully, by actually doing it out, you can get a sense for why the problem occurs. Yeah, Patrick.
When you're not changing much, does this help if convert faster?
No, it'll make no difference. Again, it's only really an issue when an edge length increases in weight. And when you initially start off, you basically assume that you put infinity everywhere where you don't know the edge length. So you're just decreasing things when you're running it from the beginning. Suppose instead of sort of seeding the initial trees with infinity, if I seeded them with 0, the initial seeds don't matter. You can seed it with anything. If I seed it with 0, though, then the distances, instead of converging downward, will converge upward. And it will take a much longer time to run if you don't use poison reverse than if you do use poison reverse. Okay. So poison reverse is only helpful. Again, these nodes are always seeking out the minimum path. And the problem occurs when an edge weight gets really long, and now all of a sudden two nodes think it's better to go through one another until the path that they believe is going through one another grows so large that they finally realize that, there's this other path that's better. Okay, let me. I need a volunteer to sort of show this. Suppose we want to go to New Jersey. Okay, or suppose we want to go to Pennsylvania, and I'm sitting at the Lincoln Tunnel, and you're sitting at the Holland Tunnel. Okay, and I tell you from the Lincoln Tunnel, I can get to Pennsylvania in an hour. And you look at your other options, like maybe going up to the George Washington Bridge. Maybe if you take that path, it'll take you 3 hours. If you go right through the Lincoln Tunnel, it'll take you an hour and a half. And it takes you 10 minutes to get, so maybe it's better if I draw this out. Okay. So here's Pennsylvania. Okay, here's the Lincoln Tunnel. And here's the Holland Tunnel. And this is where you are. And this is where I am. Okay? And I'm telling you, I can get Pennsylvania in 1 hour. Okay, here's the George Washington Bridge. And let's suppose this says 3 hours. Okay, and it takes you 20 minutes or half an hour to get up there, and half an hour to get down to the Holland Tunnel. And suppose you know that from the other side of the tunnel, this is currently 2 hours. Okay, then your bet is to go through me, right? You can get there in an hour and a half. Am I doing this right? Sorry, no, sorry. Let's change me and you. No, wait. Let's keep it the way it was. That's you. This is me. Sorry. Let's say I'm also claiming 2 hours. Okay. Let's say this is quarter. So what's your best path right now? Yeah, Ron.
3 hours to get to Pennsylvania, is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So the George Washington Bridge. It's reporting 3 hours to get to Pennsylvania. From the other side of the tunnel, 2 hours. And from the Holland Tunnel, 2 hours. And it takes half an hour to get to the Holland Tunnel. It takes you half an hour to get to the George Washington Bridge. It takes a quarter hour to get through the tunnel. So this is the best route right now. Right? Okay, so suppose all of a sudden, hang on. Sorry, let me fix my example. Let's say this is 5 hours. Let's say this is, sorry. Let's say this is 3 hours. Okay? So you can get there in 2.5 hours by going through Pennsylvania. You can get there in 3 hours or 3.5 hours by going through me, right? Half an hour and then 3 hours, however you would go from there. Or you could get there in 5.5 hours taking the George Washington Bridge. Okay? Suppose all of a sudden, you hear some accident. This shoots up to 8 hours. Right? What's your best option now? Best option is me, going through the Holland Tunnel. Right? So, half an hour down here, and supposedly 3 hours that way. What you didn't know is when I was telling you it takes me 3 hours, I was really going through you. You come down here, I'll send you right back that way. That's how I got the 3 hours. Okay? So once I now find out that you're claiming that you can get there, your new claim is you can get there in 3.5 hours. Right? By going this way. So you then tell me, well, you can get there in 3.5 hours. So I'll tell you, well, if you can get there in 3.5 hours, I get there in 4 hours. Okay, so I update my estimate. I'm now 4 hours. Okay, well, if I'm now 4 hours, well, your estimate, still going through me, you can get there in 4.5 hours. Okay, so once you tell me that you can get there in 4.5 hours, well, I'm going through you. I can get there in 5 hours. Okay, so then you say 5.5 hours, I say 6 hours, or sorry, 5.5 hours, 6 hours, 6.5 hours, 7 hours. At some point, it becomes better for you to take this route instead. And things will change. You'll go this way. I'll go this way. Okay? Suppose we had done the poison reversing. When it was initially 2 hours, okay, you were telling me you get there in 2.5 hours. Okay? By going through you, I can get there 3 hours. It doesn't do you any good for me to tell you that. I mean, I'm going through you. My time is definitely more than yours. You're definitely not going to want to go through me. So I'll send you infinity. I can't get you there. I'm going through you. I can get you there. My time's infinity. So now this thing jumps up to 8. You already know not to go through me. Right? There's a better route to the George Washington Bridge. So take that instead. And then once you take that instead, now since if I'm choosing not to go through you, maybe I have another route this way. I can now take that route. And now that I'm not going through you, I will once again announce to you, hey, this is my time to get there. Okay? So that's the idea of poison reverse. If I'm going through your path, if I'm using you to get to a certain destination, I'm not going to report my bits to that destination. Okay? So I said sometimes poison reverse helpful. I'm not sure I get to why. I think on the homework I do get to when and why it's helpful. But anyway, so try and do the homework. A lot of it is brute force. You just have to spend a lot of time working through these problems. It gets kind of annoying, but once you get to the point where you're annoyed by having to do it all, by then you should understand it, right? So, believe me, the one who really suffers is the grader on these kinds of homeworks. So. Nah, let's get it in. You could the first one you could have started already. All right, that's it.